Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Rich Lyons, Living After Faith. I want you to come laugh with me. I've got someone who's going to laugh with us today, Dr. Darrel Ray. I met Dr. Ray on the Atheist Experience, which is in Austin, Texas. I called in and was one of the callers to that show, and we found out that we have a really lot of things in common. He has recoveringreligionist.com. That's his website. You can find an incredible resource if you're coming out of religion. Things that I wish I had known 5 years ago would have helped me tremendously. It's available to you now, and we'll talk about that. So, Dr. Ray, thanks for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure. Good to be on.
Let's start at the beginning. How did you get interested into recovering religionists?
Well, I've been interested in religion my whole life, and my early degrees were in sociology and anthropology. My master's was in religion because I thought I was going to be a minister. At the end of 2 years of getting my master's, I realized I couldn't tell anybody else to believe what I didn't believe. So then I switched and got a doctorate in psychology. So but I've always been really interested in the anthropology, sociology, and psychology of religion. So as years went by and I saw the way religion was developing, at least in the United States, especially in the Bush era, it just made sense to start exploring why is religion so powerful? What really makes it work? I had some good ideas, obviously, because I'd been studying it for years. But when I read Richard Dawkins and his idea of viruses of the mind, it just all kind of clicked. And that's what led to me to write The God Virus, which has turned out to be a far better seller than anybody thought it would. It's been in the top 10 plus for over a year now of atheist books in the United States.
Well, my wife, it is on her Christmas list, Deanna Joy, it's on her Christmas list. She saw an hour-long program where you were talking about the book itself, and she was just like, we have to have this. This is amazing. This is awesome. It will totally click with what you're saying. So kind of share with us a little bit about the concept of the book and where it goes.
Well, I start out with the notion that a religion is an infection of the mind, just like rabies is an infection of the brain, and that there are parasites. It's like parasites that infect our minds. Every religion infects our minds like a parasite infects our bodies, and then it takes control in some way, shape, or form. You know, rabies takes control of our brains and makes us do things we would not normally do. Religion takes control of our brains and makes us do things we would not normally do, like become celibate or have abstinence-only programs. And I explore how this works, both at an individual level and at a cultural level. The subtitle of the book is How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture, but both of those are keys. Of course, the interest aspect that we're talking about here is sex, so I do spend a couple chapters talking about the whole sexual issue. And why have you noticed so many religions are so consumed with sex? To understand the infection piece a little bit better, you can ask a Muslim what's wrong with being a Christian. You can ask a Catholic what's wrong with being a Protestant. You can ask a Protestant what's wrong with being a Buddhist. And all of those people, if they're well-educated or even educated at all about religion, can tell you what's wrong with being any of those other religions. But ask any of those people, what's wrong with being your own religion? And you will get nothing.
Yeah, that answer doesn't exist.
Yeah, it doesn't. Their minds go blank. Their mouths shut up. They go into arguments and logic that are about the age of 5 to 7 years old. So if you ask a Christian what's wrong with being a Christian, you'll get 5 to 7-year-old logic. If you ask that same Christian what's wrong with being a Muslim, you'll get much more sophisticated logic. Because most people are pretty rational in analyzing other people's religions and the problems, especially with those religions. They are absolutely irrational when it comes to analyzing the problems with their own religion. So that reveals the infection. That's the best experiment to see the infection at work, is it blinds people.
Do you think part of the process here is that they're trained by religion that thought is a bad thing, that the mind is enmity against God, as the scripture says? So because the mind is an evil thing, they consciously or subconsciously turn it off.
Well, it's more fundamental than that, Rich. People get religion when their rational immune systems are underdeveloped. We get religion and we get religious concepts about 5 to 7 years old. That's when the majority of people get them. So if you think about it, they're getting infected at a time when their rational system can't even examine these ideas and these issues. I mean, you didn't choose to speak English. It was just there when you were born.
Right.
So you just imbibed it. You didn't choose to be a Christian. It just happened to be there when you were born, and you imbibed it. We imbibe these things uncritically. And once they're embedded in our brains, it's very difficult to unembed them, if you will. Once you're infected with a virus, it's like chickenpox. If you're infected with chickenpox as a child, you're infected with chickenpox the rest of your life. And it can come back out in adult, and we call that shingles. Religion's similar. You get infected at a very young age. It may actually stay hidden. People may not be particularly religious until one day they get under a lot of stress. They have a death in the family. They have an illness themselves. They go through some crisis, and we've all seen it. People go back to Jesus when they go through the crisis. Well, that's when shingles comes out. When you get under stress, your immune system is under attack. Shingles at that time can come out and express itself. As adults, if you're under a lot of stress, religion can break out as well. It's remarkably similar, Rich, as I explored this whole concept. It's just remarkable how many parallels there are between pathogens, whether they be viruses or germs or bacteria or parasites, and the way religion functions.
That's amazing. And I'm totally with the pastor's hat on now thinking, if I had had this concept back then, I could have totally run with that, using it to spread my virus.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways we did. We focused on people who were down on their luck, people who had experienced some crisis. They were reaching out to anything for help, and we could be that anything.
Best time to infect somebody is when they're physically sick. Best time to infect them with religion. That's why you have hospitals. That's why chaplains are so important in the Army, because that's a very stressful time with kids. So you can infect people when they're under stressful situations or when they're biologically infected with something and their immune system's under attack. The two systems work together. In fact, biological infections and gut virus infections, they work simultaneously and together. If you put an entire culture under stress, like Haiti is under stress right now from the earthquake and other things, that's the best time to send the evangelicals down, because you can infect lots of people very fast with an entire culture under stress. And that's what happens. It's what happened with the Christian swing through Northern Europe. Rome was collapsing. It was a great time to infect the rest of the world with Christianity. In religion after religion, most religions spread when the culture is under stress.
I was going to say, what about 9/11?
Yeah, look at what happened after that. George Bush was able to spread his evangelical God virus with the cooperation of Focus on the Family and all the other groups. We're still paying for that today.
Well, now, I'm hoping that you're going to tell me you've got a shot developed now and that we can begin distributing this vaccine.
Well, I'm not sure I've got that yet, but I will say this. A lot of people, once they realize they're infected, realize, I don't want to infect my children with it. And they ask me, well, how do I prevent that? And the answer is actually pretty simple, although it takes some effort on the parent part. The worst thing you can do is try to protect your kids from religion, because if you do, that leaves them vulnerable. It's very much like trying to protect your kids from diseases. Children actually need to be exposed to biological pathogens to strengthen their immune system. And the immune system is like a muscle. If it never gets used, then it atrophies. And then when it's really attacked by something, it has no defense. Same thing with children. If you never teach children about religion, if you just try to keep them protected, then they'll be easily infected by a cult or something later. So the answer is, for children at least, take children to church, and lots of them. Take them to a Buddhist temple, take them to a Baha'i church, take them to a Baptist church, take them to a Muslim mosque, take them to all sorts of religions so they can see with their own two eyes and come to their own conclusions the religious ridiculousness of all religions. That's the best way to prevent it. Now, for adults, what you and I are doing right now is we're trying to vaccinate our culture, and we're trying to help people find a vaccine. So that's unfortunately, I don't have the shot.
We're working on it. We're developing it.
Actually, I think we are developing it.
One thing that I felt like is probably a good thing to do for children is give them a loving home environment. Most of the cults, and of course, a lot of what I talk about is cult, because the religion I was in, I mean, you can Google United Pentecostal Church International and the word cult, and you come up with tens of thousands of hits. So
right.
It's obviously a cult. but most of them thrive on a vengeful, angry God. Their view of God is going to be shaped by their parents originally. So if they are raised in a loving, warm, kind, affectionate home, not one that's harsh and judgmental and mean and strict, they're not going to associate with the cult father, with the cult God. That's not going to come off to them as loving and kind. And it's not a perfect inoculation, but I think it goes a long way towards them saying, hey, something's wrong here.
I think that's a good component of inoculation. You know, I'm a psychologist. I think there are personality components that make people more or less susceptible to infection. You know, you could be in a family of, say, 6 people, 2 parents and 4 kids, and 3 of the kids and 1 parent will get the flu and the other 2 don't, because their bodies somehow have a resistance to it. And I think the same thing is true of personalities. I think some personalities, and there's evidence for this, I'm not just guessing it, there's evidence that some personalities are more prone to religious infection than others. So it may not just be how we raise our children, it may be who those children are and what their personality tendencies are.
I want to move towards your next book, and that's where we originally met. Your next book goes into one of the specific areas, and in starting Living After Faith, I talked about PTSD. I talked about some of the difficulty I had in the church and coming out of the church, but we hit an episode where we talked about sex, and it was kind of a racy topic. It was called Too Fucked Up to Fuck.
I love that episode. I listened to it twice.
It's amazing the response we've gotten from that single episode. I was kind of shy about going into that because it was a horrible problem for me, but I had no clue how widespread it was among people who are recovering from religion.
I think it's epidemic. My thesis is religion needs sex to survive, just like gonorrhea needs sex to survive. I think religion is a sexually transmitted disease. And proof of that is choose any religion, just almost any major religion, and then try to take sex out of it, and that religion would collapse. Can you imagine Mormonism without its sexual restrictions, or Catholicism without masturbation? Or
a celibacy of the priesthood?
Yeah, or celibacy in Catholicism, or prohibitions on premarital sex among Baptists and Pentecostals. I mean, all these groups have got tremendous restrictions on sex. So what I've been exploring, and I explore in the God virus, is how that works. Why is sex so important to religions? And it's actually a remarkably simple answer. And once I came across this and really started exploring, I thought, dang, number one, why didn't I think about it 20 years ago? And number 2, why isn't anybody else writing about this?
So the name of the new book, and when is it coming out, and what's the name?
Well, it's tentatively scheduled to come out next summer. So let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. It's still being written as we speak.
All right.
But it's going to be called, we haven't settled on the final title, but it's something like God and Sex.
I'm ready to buy the book right now.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are, but I got to get it written and published first. God and Sex, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. That's going to be that's the working title right now. Wayne and I talked a bit about this in the Atheist Experience. We are incredible sexual creatures. Number one, we are probably one of the top 2 most sexual creatures on the face of the earth. We are only one of 2 creatures that actually hides estrus, the fertility of the female. You cannot look at a woman and tell if she's fertile or not. Bonobo apes are the only other species among mammals that does that. There's just so many things around human biology that says we are incredibly sexual. For example, how much sex do we have for each live birth? You have to include masturbation in that, too. People have thousands of sexual encounters for every live birth they have. So it's obvious that sex is not for procreation among humans. If it were, we would mate more like cattle, or we would mate more like dogs. A dog is only interested in sex when the female, generally speaking, the female is only interested in sex when she's in estrus, when she's in heat. Cow is the same way. Males are, of course, ready to mate at any time, but they're not generally be able to mate unless the female is in estrus. Humans aren't like that. A female is receptive all the time. So, with that, framing that, it tells us biologically we are incredibly sexual creatures. We want a lot of sex, and it is not for procreation. In fact, if you had sex like the Pope tells you you have to have sex for procreation only, you're actually mating more like an animal. If you think about that, the Pope wants us to be animals. He wants us to be like animals Most animals only mate for procreation. Insects, let me think about every insect. They don't go around screwing. They go around mating for procreation.
Wow.
Cattle, dogs, you name the species, almost every species on the planet mates only for procreation. They don't waste all their energy on sex. So there must be a reason why bonobo apes and humans can and do have sex a lot more than they ever do for procreation. And the answer to that question is obvious. Sex creates social connection and bonds. So what's going on here? If the Pope wants us to only have sex for procreation, he only wants us to have sex like dogs have sex, or like cattle have sex, or like insects have sex, just for procreation. That something is really strange there. And I found nobody saying, wow, the Pope sounds like he wants us to be like animals. Most religions say, well, if you just have sex anytime, that's like an animal. No, it's not like an animal.
It's the opposite.
Animals only have sex for procreation. Humans and bonobos have sex whenever they darn well want to. It's a reverse. And once I start explaining this to people, most people say, wow, I never thought of that. We are different, not like religion says we are, but because our biology is very different from those other animals. So the explanation for that is, if you get infected with a God virus, just like you're infected with Toxoplasma gondii. Toxoplasma gondii is a parasite that infects the brain of a rat and takes over control of that rat's behavior. It takes over control in such a way that rats no longer are afraid of cats. They're still afraid of dogs or owls or any other predator, but they're not afraid of cats. Because the only way this parasite can propagate is in the gut of a cat. So it infects the rat brain. The rat goes out and tries to find a cat to kiss. Lo and behold, it gets eaten. So in this case, the parasite really doesn't want the rat to survive. He wants the rat to get eaten, but only eaten by cats. That's pretty powerful.
That's amazing.
If you think about it, there are God viruses that do the same thing. There's God viruses that infect the brains of human males and females, Catholic human males and females. The Catholic God virus infects the brain of a male or a female, and they become nuns or priests. We had a virus, biological virus, that stopped people from reproducing. We would have every doctor in the country on that one. That would alarm a lot of people.
Yeah.
We actually have that. It's called Catholicism. Priests and nuns become celibate based on an infection with a crazy God virus called the Catholic Church. Now, that same God virus can make people reproduce a lot, too. So it's very sophisticated in that it says, have as many children as you can if you're not a priest or a nun, and infect them all with God virus. If you are a priest and we can make you a priest or a nun, then your energy is all going to be into infecting as many people as you can over your next lifetime without reproducing. In other words, commit genetic suicide.
Wow.
That's what happened.
It is absolutely fascinating. One thing you mentioned a minute ago, and it piqued my interest, is the social aspect and how sex builds that social connection. And what I'm hearing here, and maybe what I'd like you to elaborate on, is, are the churches using that by disrupting that social connection, not only between people in the church and out of the church, but between people who are actually married and live together and have that relationship?
Yeah, actually what's happening, and it's called the guilt cycle. Once a God virus infects you, then its next job is to make you feel as guilty as you can about something you're going to do anyway. You'll notice religions tend to focus on food or sex.
Right. Because
you're going to eat and you're going to have sex. So they don't really want you to stop eating, and we don't want you to stop having sex. What they want you to do is feel guilty when you do it. Because the only place you can get forgiveness is with your particular God virus. So if I'm a Catholic and I masturbate, the only place I'm going to be able to get forgiveness for masturbation is with a Catholic priest. I don't know any Catholics that masturbate and they go confess to the Baptist minister or the Muslim imam. They don't go there. They don't do that because you can't get forgiveness. Wherever you learned your guilt is where you have to go back to get forgiveness for your guilt. Guilt is learned. You learn it from your religion. And the religion uses guilt to have you come back. Well, food is a pretty inefficient way to get people to feel guilty. And the major God viruses have learned that sex is the best way to do it. So they have created all sorts of guilt around sex. You can make people feel guilty about sex, and they have this incredible anger and incredible fear inside of themselves. They have to do something with it. But what do? You can't go screw your girlfriend. You can't go masturbate. You can't have sex with your wife in ways that the religion says you can't. So you have to read your Bible. You have to go to Sunday school. You have to go to church. And it's a constant seeking out of this relief from the guilt that I feel. And it's tremendous guilt. Religions are just great at teaching you all this guilt. And then they throw you a little carrot and say, oh, but you can get forgiveness if you just come to confession, or if you just pray to Jesus, or if you just read your Bible, or if you just go to church. I mean, there's all these things that you have to do. And sometimes it works. It works often enough that it brings people back. It's called intermittent reinforcement in psychology.
Okay.
And here's the way it works. If you want to train an animal to do something, you reward it regularly at the beginning. And then as they get better and better at it, for example, if you want to train your dog to fetch, then you throw something out. When and if the dog gets back to you, you reward it. And you throw a stick out. When they bring it back, you reward it. So you keep rewarding the dog many times until they get the picture. Next time you throw the stick, they bring it back to you. You don't reward it with a treat or something. You just pat it on the head and say, good dog. Okay, so you do that a few more times. Then, after a while, you can do it so that you can throw that Frisbee out. The dog brings it back. You say nothing to it. You don't give it a treat. You don't say anything to it. That dog will work even harder to get that praise and that reinforcement and that treat. He will go fetch that Frisbee 10 or 15 or 20 times for no reinforcement. Skinner discovered this with pigeons. Pigeons would literally peck their bills off using this methodology of intermittent reinforcement to get a single little treat.
Wow.
Humans are the same way. So what we have is humans are literally denying themselves one of their biggest appetites, sex, in order to get relief from the guilt.
Guilt. What a powerful word that is. And in our next episode, you're going to meet a young man, 22 years old, whose story of how guilt ripped his life apart will make you angry. It'll make you feel things that you really don't want to feel until we get towards the end of his story and you hear how his life is today. Today's guest has been Dr. Darrel Ray, and you can find Dr. Darrel Ray at recoveringreligionist.com, but better yet, buy his book, The God Virus. I'm Rich Lyons. This is Living After Faith. Come laugh with me.